Hello, I'm Anna and welcome to my first bookish video. If you don't know me, I do have another YouTube channel that's more like lifestyle and vlog, but I wanted a place that I could just talk books, knowing that the people who are watching really just wanted to hear it. Personally, I'm a big booktube consumer, and it has gotten me very excited to become a booktube producer. And so I have a lot of videos planned that are coming up that I'm very excited for, beginning with today's, which is going to be tier ranking every single book that I have read this year so far, because it's still not quite the end of the year, but we're getting kind of close. I also figure that this is a good introduction into my little booktube channel because it'll go over basically everything I've read. You can get a taste, you know, of the books that I like. We can talk a little bit about some that I don't. These tiers are going to be a little bit different than the actual ratings that I've given the book, because I'm not rating them the 0 to 5 stars. This is strictly ranking. Starting with the top tier, you can see right there, beware of the tear that may be shed. These are the books that are just stand out. They're the ones that after I finished them this year, I had to sit and let it soak all in. Sometimes there were a few little just single tears. No book made me bawl this year, but just like single tears, whether emotional or happy, that may have been shed, and that tier is reserved for strictly those books. The second one, could give a 40-minute presentation on. These books, whether good or bad, are ones that I just really like to talk about. Maybe it's because they were poorly written and so I love talking about it. Maybe it was because they were problematic so I feel the need to talk about it, or maybe it's because I loved it so much but it wasn't quite that top tier ranking. That's that second one. Could give a 40-minute presentation on. Third one, Living Rent Free. These are books that I remember. They pop up into my head maybe quite a few times since I've read them, but they don't quite deserve the higher ranks, but they're living rent free in my mind. Going one more down, Thanks for the Memories. These are books that I remember them, I remember what they were about, I remember reading them, but I don't find myself thinking back to them. I don't find myself super impacted by them, so it's just kind of a, thanks for the memories. Going down another one, Loathe Entirely. These are books that I just really didn't like, but I don't necessarily feel the need to speak about them all that much. It's just dang, disappointing read. Loathe Entirely. And then the bottom tier right there is Who Read You, just the books that I could not recall details about and am not convinced that I actually read them. I randomized the little book covers down there, so these aren't necessarily in the order I read them, but we can just go ahead and get started. We'll start with A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. So I feel like everyone knows A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, or at least has heard about it a little bit. I read this in the very beginning of the year. I kind of feel like that's when it was super talked about on Book Talk and BookTube. But it's Pip solving her little murder case, you remember? And though I really loved it, granted I also read it almost a year ago, I do feel like this one just belongs in Thanks for the Memories because I don't think back to it. I can't really remember everything that happened, and I really enjoyed it when I read it, but it didn't leave that lasting impact. Next, Maniac Magee by Jerry Spinelli. This is a middle grade book that I reread because it was my 5th grade class read aloud, and honestly I think it belongs in Thanks for the Memories too. It's nostalgic for me. I think it won some awards whenever it was published in maybe the early 2000s is my guess, but it's kind of a lesser known middle grade novel. The Speckled Beauty by Rick Bragg is a memoir that is about how much he loves a dog, and he's going in the Who Read You category just because I could not tell you a single thing that really happened in that book other than the fact that he loves his dog. It was just quite boring to me, and I think I even gave it 1.5 stars, maybe two if I was feeling generous. David Sedaris, The Best of Me, was little essays. He has a few humor books, he does funny essays. This one was the best of all of his essays from the different books. A couple of them made me laugh out loud, which does not usually happen. A literal chuckle erupted from me in the middle of Kroger while I was listening to this book. And so I think for that reason I have to put it in Thanks for the Memories because I remember that happened, but again, it did not stick out in my mind. I feel like we're starting with all these ones that didn't stick out in my mind. Let's find one that I really liked. Let's see. Okay, let's just go Book Lovers, because Book Lovers is one that I knew whenever I was making this. It's gonna Beware of the Tear That May Be Shed. Book Lovers is the first book. I had checked it out from the library, and while I was reading it, I was tempted to actually purchase a copy so I could start highlighting and annotating, which I've never felt the need to do in books before, but somehow it just spoke to me. It's a romance between Nora and Charlie. They both work in the publishing industry, so it's a bookish book, and it just felt really deep while still being pretty low stakes, and I just really appreciated a lot of the lines. It's the fact that Nora is a hardworking woman, but the book doesn't force her to change that about herself. Also, some of the lines about being known by people, some of the lines about reasons why they loved books just really spoke to me. And it was 100% one that after I finished reading it, I just laid on the couch. There was a happy little tear that went down my cheek, and I just had to soak it in, and I'm still tempted to purchase a copy so I can go back and annotate it. And I've also already pre-ordered Happy Place by Emily Henry, coming out in April 2023, because Book Lovers had that much of an impact on me. So there we go. How's that for our first top tier one? Going on next, The Woman They Could Not Silence by Kate Moore. This book is about a woman, I believe her name was Elizabeth, but that's gonna be embarrassing if I'm wrong. It's about a woman who was put into a mental institution by her husband and kept there despite there not being a need for her to be there, other than the fact that she had her own mind and didn't want to just submit and had her own like thoughts and was willing to talk about them, which made her be quote unquote mentally insane. It's a long book, but I never wished that it was shorter. It's a nonfiction book, but it's told in a way that felt still just like a story. And a lot of it too is pieced together parts of her journals, and lots of times she had mentioned the fact that she had hoped that her story would live beyond her. So while reading it, it was this great feeling of almost like respect, just in the fact that it's like she was so excited and like hoped that her story would live beyond her, and then like here I am reading it in 2022. So maybe you can tell, but could give a 40-minute presentation on. Also, they're still taking trees down outside my apartment, so if you hear them, that's what's going on right now. The Things We Cannot Say is going to be an interesting one for placement because I gave 5 stars when I read it because I was so like impacted by it, and it's one that I've been tempted to go back and take it down from 5 stars because I don't remember it. I remember that it's a World War II story. It's told in dual timeline. One is the grandma, and it's like as she was young living in Poland, I believe, and then one is the granddaughter, and she's like trying to figure out the history and figure out what's going on with her grandma or like her past. And I remember being so impacted by it, but I don't remember it. And so even though it was a 5 stars, I think it has to go in thanks for the memories. But also because of that, I'm like tempted to reread it because I was like, if it impacted me that much, how did I just forget it? Oh, this will be an interesting one. Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell is going in Loathe Entirely. I did not like the book at all. And I've seen quite a few people who really have, but I knew the ending by page 25, 30. Like it felt so obvious to me, which does not always happen in thrillers or mysteries. Like I am not one that always like figures it out or anything like that, but it was just written in a way where I felt like, how is this suspenseful at all? Like we all already know any twist that's going to come. And so then whenever the twist actually did come, I was like, that felt confusing to me because I've been knew this, and I thought that it was obvious enough that we should have already been knew this. So very unpleasant reading experience for me. I think I gave it like half a star. Loathe Entirely. The Love Hypothesis was very mid, and I hear people who have loved it and I hear people who have despised it. And even though the book itself, I don't think necessarily would have like kept itself in my memory, like kept itself being relevant in my own head, the fact that it's so popular and so talked about means it's going and living rent free. Not a single time has it paid rent for the amount of times that it's been forced into my brain for being so mid, but it does stay in my brain, in my thoughts. The Roundhouse by Louise Erdrich, that was a reread for me. I had read it in high school and I wanted to read it again. I think it's going in thanks for the memories. I would suggest it to anyone. It's Native American literature, and I believe it's a YA book. It's not like hands down the best book in the world, but it is a really solid read and I think is informative enough while being a good fictional story. Memoirs of a Geisha, I felt deceived by because I listened to this book. I enjoyed it when I listened to it because I didn't know any context about it as I was listening to it. And like I said, I enjoyed it. And then afterwards, I found out that it was written by a white man and it's not historically accurate. But I also feel like the most important thing is the fact that it was written by a white man. And so this one would have been living rent free if it were actually a good book, which I wish I knew going into it, but it's going into the could give a 40-minute presentation on because people have. It's just something lands icky about it, knowing its author and knowing that it's not the best portrayal. Woman on Fire by Lisa Barr. I actually bought in Barnes & Noble earlier this year. It is interesting. It's kind of thriller-y, and the first half of it was infinitely better than the second half. It's like they try to turn a character into a psychopath, but there's been like no reason going up until that point that you would imagine that that would be true. So it was like a twist with no backing, almost as if they didn't know how to end it, so they just like picked something, pulled something from the jar, and then tried to make that work. I didn't rate it poorly as I read it because it was fine, and I was trying to balance the good first half with the bad second half, but maybe I need to reread it. I didn't like it though. The Lions of Little Rock, I remember as a historical fiction, and I think it's middle grade, maybe just like regular juvenile. I think it was a good book. However, I don't remember it at all. Cultish, I'm not convinced I ever read. I thought it was a mistake when I saw it on my Goodreads. I know of its existence, and I'm pretty sure I finished it even. It just really didn't stand out. 28 Summers by Ellen Hildebrand was my first Ellen Hildebrand that I ever read, and now I've read like 6 or 7 of her books. I rated this one 5 stars. I was like blown away. Felt like the emotions really really had me. And it was also when I was getting back into like a super reading kick back in like May after I graduated grad school, because during grad school it's a little harder. Despite all of that though, it just really didn't stand out after I closed the back cover. Like it was so close maybe to being Beware of the Tear That May Be Shed, except that it just hasn't stayed with me since then. Hasn't impacted, I haven't continue to think about it all that much. So for that reason, it's going in Thanks for the Memories. The guest list, Lucy Foley. Thanks for the Memories. I listened to it. I feel like maybe it would have been even better had I actually done the experience of reading it physically instead of listening to it. Let me start going through these faster so this isn't an hour-long video as my little introduction to BookTube. The Summer of Broken Rules is a cute, young romance. Takes place on Nantucket, feels very summery, emotional enough while not being too high stakes. I feel like I also read it recently, so this could play into it, but I feel like living rent free. Ellen Hildebrand, Winter in Paradise, it was all right. It was nothing like 28 Summers, and so I feel like for that reason, I can't put it in the same rank as 28 Summers, and so it's going in the Who Read You, because let's see, what's the synopsis? I think it's a woman and her husband's living a double life in the Virgin Islands maybe, but then he dies in a helicopter crash and she has to like go down there and figure out what his double life was. That's pretty good as a synopsis. I didn't think I was remembering it that much. The Rose Code by Kate Quinn. Loved this book as I read it. It's long, it's a historical fiction. I kind of came into myself this year and realizing that I like historical fictions. This was like new news to me, which why would that be new news to me, the books that I like, but it was new news to me. I gave it 5 stars, but it was not as emotional to deserve being up here. I don't feel like I could talk about it like all that much. Like it was very interesting, but I'm not passionate about it, so it's gonna go in living rent free. I'll Give You the Sun is a cute YA, what even was it? Was it a romance? I feel like it was a romance. I remember it was about twins. Thanks for the Memories. The Click. I reread this because I had read it whenever I was young. As you can see, I already put it in Could Give a 40-minute presentation on. I remembered it being like interesting, not super deep at all fiction whenever I was young. That was just like, oh, girls, and some of them are kind of mean, and we get to follow their drama and all of this stuff. It promotes some like really negative ideals. All of the female friendships in it are just horrible to each other, which obviously like when you're a preteen, you don't always know how to have good female friendships at that time. So then I feel like the books that would be promoted and popular among that age should be like teaching you something and not teaching you that the lip gloss you wear really matters, or showing you like how to be really mean and trashy to people that could be your friends, or not teaching you that like popularity is really something that's going to go down in the books as really mattering. I was genuinely shocked as I was reading back through it, because I was like, this is what I was consuming? Like this is what I was learning from as I was a preteen? No. I'd kind of thought as I read it that maybe I would read through the rest of the series too, and it's not worth my time. This is coming from someone who read almost all of Pretty Little Liars last year. Awful books, trash books, but entertaining. This one I was just shocked. Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. This is the first, I think it's like the first part of her autobiography, because there's 2 more that I haven't listened to or read yet that I think are a lot less popular, but I think are like the next stages of her autobiography. I'm not really sure how those relate to each other, but this is the first one. I listened to it and she's the narrator, which makes it feel really special. I would definitely say living rent free. It's told in a way that it's like a collection of stories, like her memories, her stories put together in, I feel like, a really artful way. Like I was really interested in her life as I was listening to her tell her story, and with a lot of really great memoirs, it just feels like an honor to be let into someone's story and let into someone's life in that way, and I really liked her autobiography. Firefly Lane by Kristen Hanna. It was an enjoyable experience reading it, but on the grand scheme of things was pretty mid. Jodi Picoult, Wish You Were Here, I think is hands down the most shocking book of this year, and I don't want to tell you any more about it because if you read it, I want you to be just as shocked as I was. I think some people, it didn't work for them. Me, it really worked for me. I remember I was reading it as I was laying out by the pool. It was probably like July, so I was absolutely melting in the Georgia heat and humidity, and it was like a physical jaw drop. Like I was reading when I reached the part, and it was pretty thought-provoking. Honestly, I feel like this one Could Give a 40-minute presentation on, just by how much like my speaking sped up as I started to talk about it. And I get really excited whenever I find other people who have read it, because it's like, you know the secret. A Flicker in the Dark, Stacey Willingham. Living rent free. It was a solid, good book, I felt like. It wasn't the best thriller in the world, but I did not enjoy reading it. That was a double negative. I did enjoy reading it as I read it. It was a good journey to go on, even though I wasn't like super surprised by it. And for a debut novel, incredible, I feel like. Ellen Hildebrand, The Identicals, perfect escapist read. As I was reading it, I was totally immersed in it. I was on Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. It takes place on both. So I'm between Living Rent Free and Thanks for the Memories, but I feel like I liked it better than some of these Thanks for the Memories ones, so it's gonna go in Living Rent Free. Home Before Dark is the book that got me, man, the tree people are really doing their thing. They weren't doing this last week, but I didn't film this video last week. I should have. Home Before Dark is the book that got me into thrillers this year. Like, I did not really read thrillers, or if I did, it was kind of like accidental, or it would be more mystery. And Home Before Dark, I'm not sure if that's horror too, but it was interesting. I really liked it. And since it had the effect of changing the books that I chose to read from then on out, we're gonna put it in, I'm not passionate about it though. Okay, Living Rent. Coming up next, The Scent of Burnt Flowers. This one I learned after I read it that it was written by a screenwriter, and I think it would have made a much better, like it read like it was written by a screenwriter. There were fade to black scenes. It felt like I would have enjoyed it a lot more if I were watching it instead of reading it. For that reason, Thanks for the Memories. It was fine. It wasn't standout. Hola Papi was a memoir, and unfortunately I don't remember, like I don't remember it. And I listened to it, so that could be a reason. That could be something playing into it. So this isn't a dig on the book at all. I still think it was interesting, probably. I just can't tell you that for sure. The Hotel Nantucket, loved. Didn't touch me in the same way that book lovers did, so it's going Living Rent Free. Firekeeper's Daughter, also loved. It's another Indigenous book. It's a Living Rent Free. It's a mystery. It's like grown up Nancy Drew a little bit. People We Meet on Vacation felt mid, which then makes me think, do I need to go back and reread it now that I've read Book Lovers and found out that I do really like Emily Henry? I don't know. People We Meet on Vacation just didn't stick. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I literally do not remember anything of. I read it because I felt like I should. Like, I always heard of it, and so I felt like I should. And I'm just not a sci-fi girly. I'm just not. Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is also going in Who Read You. I just don't, like, it just didn't stand out. A little bit less than mid. Wake. Now, this is an interesting one because it's a debut author, and I got it as an ARC, which made me feel special, but she's an Australian author, and it takes place in the outback of Australia, and it's a little thriller mystery type deal. I will definitely say Living Rent Free. Really enjoyed it. I gave it, I think, 5 stars. I think I gave it 5 stars because I was entranced the whole time. It was one of those books that I didn't want to finish it because I didn't want it to be done. I felt like the solution to the mystery when you find it out sat well, like I felt convinced while not having picked up on it necessarily myself. So, loved that one. Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, it wasn't stand out to me, but also that could be because since I'm in a mental health background, it was like I already knew most of the things that she was saying. I feel like there needs to be another one between Thanks for the Memories and Live Entirely, because that's where this one wants to go. Honestly, I'm putting it in Who Read You. I just finished it recently, but I feel like in a few months' time, this is not one that I'll be going back and thinking about. There won't be too many memories. But like I said, I also got 2 degrees in basically that same stuff, so Bad Fat Black Girl. This one is Notes from a Trapped Feminist. I'm gonna say Thanks for the Memories. It was interesting, and it was a good listen. I believe I listened to it. Go down. Ooh, Profit and Punishment. This one is about how poverty and incarceration intersect, and passionate. Alias Emma was a thrill of a ride. It takes place in like a day and a half, maybe even over just like one night, but it felt fast-paced. It was spy vibes. It was the vibes of I'm gonna slide a confidential folder across the table and say, this is your next mission. It was those vibes, which I didn't think I would necessarily love, but I did, and so Living Rent Free. The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell, I enjoyed so much more than the other Lisa Jewell one that I read. I'm gonna say Living Rent Free. Living Rent Free. Oh no, I need to like zoom out. There we go. Conversations with Friends. Super slow paced, took me a long time to get through, kind of put me in a reading slump, kind of put me in a weird headspace, but I think it was because it was written well. It was written in the sense that I kept having to remind myself as I was reading it, like, Anna, these are her thoughts, these are not your thoughts. Like, she is going through this type of stuff. You are not going through this type of stuff, so you don't have to feel this way. That being said, I don't think back about it all that often. It made me just really uncomfortable, but it was because I think that meant that it was written well. But it's going in Thanks for the Memories. I'm so glad my mom died. I feel like everyone knows this one by now. If not, have read it. I listened to it because she was the narrator, so that felt special. This is another memoir where I just felt like, wow, thank you for letting us into your story, because she did not have to let us into her story, but she chose to kind of like welcome us into her life and talking about what she's been through. I think this one could give a 40-minute presentation on, and I think a lot of that is because how mental health loaded the book was, obviously because that was her experience. And a lot of people have similar experiences, even if they're not like in similar situations in their life. Like a lot of people, I think, can relate to this book in a way that maybe they wouldn't have been able to put words onto themselves, or just like the fact of reading someone else go through similar things that you have gone through can be really helpful and sometimes even really healing. It's not Beware of the Tear That May Be Shed level, but it could give a 40-minute presentation on level. The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. Thanks for the memories. It was all right. It was all right. The Fountains of Silence I put in here because I thought that I would be done with it by the time I filmed this video, but I'm not. I still have like 100 pages left, and so I feel like it's not quite fair for me to rate it. My guess is that it's going to be Living Rent Free. This is a historical fiction about Spain under the dictatorship, Franco, and it's a fascism that I feel like we don't hear about as much as like the big one, you know, Hitler, Mussolini. We hear about those, but we don't always hear about Franco Francisco. And so for that reason, this book has been super interesting to me, and I want to find out if there are more books that also take place in this historical time period, because for historical fiction, I think you can find so many books. Like if you're looking for women who are part of the resistance during World War II that live in Paris or London, like you can find that. You can definitely find that. There's so many books that take place in those specific areas of history, but this is the first one that I have found and that I have read that takes place in Spain in this time. And I haven't read any others by this author yet, but I want to, because it seems like her historical fictions go into time periods and areas that aren't so widely covered by other historical fictions. Like I believe she has one during the Romanian Revolution too. So not only is it like lesser heard of times of history, or lesser talked about in world history taught in the US times of history, but also like I studied abroad in Spain and then I traveled to Romania this past summer. So somehow she's hitting like the locations that I have been to too. So I'm very excited to read more by her. Based on the description there, I'm almost considering could give a 40-minute presentation on. It is. Final Girl Support Group, Loathe Entirely. I did not like it. I did not like it. It was so fast-paced that I did not feel convinced by any of the twists. Lots of times I just felt confused because I felt like there'd be 3 twists or 3 like bombs dropped in one page, where I was like, I didn't even get to sit with this first one, and now here we are knowing something entirely different. It was a bit of a slasher at the end, which I also just think I'm just not a huge fan of, so I did not like it. Prison by Any Other Name. This one's also going in, could give a 40-minute presentation on anything about the jail system, the prison system, mass incarceration. Probably is going to go there that I read. I find that with these books, I would definitely suggest them to other people, but also I feel like I didn't necessarily learn all that much from them, but that also is like, you know, given the profession and my exposure and stuff like that, it's like knowledge that I kind of just like live with and witness every day, but I would like to be able to share that. So honestly, like Profit and Punishment, definitely would recommend. Prison by Any Other Name, definitely would recommend. I think there's one more on here. Yeah, Redeeming Justice is a memoir, so if you're less into the informative nonfiction and would prefer listening to someone's experience, this one's just gonna go straight up here too. Redeeming Justice is Jared Adams, and he was wrongly convicted of a sexual charge when he was young. I forget what age, maybe like 18. He was young. Lots of screwy, messed up things happened to him that got him convicted, and I believe he got 8 years. And unfortunately, his story is not an outlier. His story is the same story that has happened to so many young Black men through the history of our country and is still happening today. But for him, he went on to become a lawyer and wants to work to get people out of that same situation that he was in. It falls in the family of The Sun Does Shine by Anthony Ray Hinton, Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. If you liked those, you'll definitely like this one. If you are curious about the justice system, I try not to call it that because I don't feel like it is that. Wait, I'm forgetting what kind of video this is. It falls in the same it falls in the same category as those books, and obviously you can tell that I could give a 40-minute presentation on it. The Riviera House by Natasha Lester is going to Beware of the Tear That May Be Shed, because there was a tear shed. This book, it is one of the, you know, World War II, Women in the Resistance, Paris type books that somehow just pluck at my heartstrings in ways that I didn't know could happen. And it is also dual timeline, but both of the timelines were good enough stories on their own that I would have read either one by itself. But then the fact that then they're so perfectly interwoven together, love. Tear was shed Don't beware the tear that may be. The tear was shed. Karen Slaughter, Fractured. I just finished this one. I have recently learned that I do like crime novels too, but I don't like true crime because of all of the ethical reasons of true crime, you know? So I feel like crime novels that are fiction can kind of scratch that itch without as many of the ethical concerns. Fractured focused a lot more on the forensics and the victim than it did, you know, like, ooh, creepy killer. Like, obviously you still learn about who did it and everything like that, but it also takes place in Atlanta, so it's fun to kind of it's fun to live in the place that a book is taking place because it feels so special anytime there's like a location shout out that I know or that like I walk by or I've been to. That being said, this book was published in 2008, and not that that's an excuse, but some of the language that is used is not inclusive for all groups of people, so definitely look up content warnings before you would read this book and take care of yourself. But it's gonna go in Living Rent Free. Under the Whispering Door, TJ Klune somehow just didn't sit with me, but it was very different than what I went into it thinking it was going to be. So part of it is my fault, the reason I didn't like it as much. I thought it was going to be a lot more lighthearted and almost like dramatic gossipy type tea whenever it said tea shop. When it was like literally actually like a tea shop, and it really grappled with like life and death and like deep romances and stuff like that. So it just really wasn't what I was expecting going into it, so it didn't sit well with me. So I'll put it in Thanks for the Memories to just be kind to it because I think it's a good book. It just, my experience reading it was one of like, oh, that's not what I was expecting. Starfish is the first book that I read this year, and I don't remember it. Granted, it was a long time ago, but I believe it's middle grade. And I almost, maybe it's written in verse? Maybe not. Maybe not. I don't remember it. Quiet is the book that's like the hidden power of introverts. I feel like if Woman on Fire is in Loathe Entirely, then Quiet can be in Loathe Entirely too. Just because I was so bored. It felt like the whole book was like, introverts, you are worthy of being on this world too. And I was like, yeah. I wasn't questioning that. And be like, just because you are introverted doesn't mean that you're a bad person. But yes, okay. So I just wasn't a huge fan. Perks of Being a Wallflower I read because I felt like I needed to, because I feel like everyone's read that. It just didn't land with me. Don't hate me if I put it in Loathe Entirely. Like maybe like loathe is a strong word. I wasn't impressed. I just didn't really care that much. Maybe I'm heartless to say that, but it's going right there. One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston I was hoping would be as good as Red, White, and Royal Blue, and I just didn't feel that way. I also did not fully read the synopsis before going into it, so I was surprised at its contents and like the paranormal part of it, all of that. But that being said, I'll put it in Thanks for the Memories because I think it was an alright book, even if it wasn't as good as Red, White, and Royal Blue, which I was hoping that it would be. Crying in H Mart, Thanks for the Memories. I just, like I said, with memoirs, being welcomed into someone's story just makes me feel like, thank you. But I haven't gone back and thought about it a lot of times since then. Karen Slaughter, Triptych. This one, I'm going to put in Loathe Entirely. I rated it to, I think like 0.25 stars or something, and this was one that I like punished with stars because based on my experience reading it, it would have been like 4.25 because I was hooked. I was interested. However, it was super gory. It was so super gory, and I felt physically ill. Which again, could be like, oh, so she did that part well, but I just didn't like that. And I took off a star for that. And then number 2 was the fact that she is a white author and wrote characters using racial slurs. So that just felt icky. So I knocked off a star for that. So it ended up being a 2.25. It was fine enough, it intrigued me enough where I want to continue reading the Will Trent series. That's the little detective that we're following that was in Fractured too, up here. And I do feel like Fractured is a lot better than Triptych, so I'm hoping that we just continue up on that upward trend there, but Triptych itself, I wouldn't necessarily recommend. The Wilder Women, this one's gonna go in Living Rent Free. I really liked it. It was magical realism, and in the way where it just made me feel like this world is beautiful and magical, like the one that I'm living in. You know, it was like the magic that happened in that world. I was just like, that's wonderful. The Golden Couple is gonna go in Loathe Entirely. I didn't even rate it all that bad, but I was so let down by the ending. The ending felt cheap, and I feel like had it been tied up in a nice little bow, I would have enjoyed it a lot more, but it wasn't tied up in a nice little bow. It was like someone just like taped 2 pieces of string together and was like, yep, this works, and I didn't feel like it worked. People Person by Candace Carty Williams, I read an arc of. I'm just gonna put it in Who Read You, because I just know, like, it just did not have a lasting impact on me. It was like a cute, fine story, but it wasn't like escapist enough where I was like, oh, this is just like so fun, like I love being in their story. It was just kind of like, I felt bored. The House Across the Lake, yeah, I know this is a controversial one. I'm just gonna say Thanks for the Memories. I didn't like the twist. I didn't like the twist, but I didn't see it coming. So I mean, there was that. I felt shocked. Did not like it as much as Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. Those are the only two of his books that I have read. And so I feel like I need to read some more just to kind of see like if they really are ones I really like, or if they're ones I should just leave alone, whatever it may be. It happened one summer. I just did not like. I didn't like it. The Marrow Thieves, Thanks for the Memories. I talked about this one in a monthly reset video on my main channel, but it is speculative fiction and I do not like speculative fiction. I feel like I'm being negative. You know I love some books. I put books in the top tier. I do not like speculative fiction because it just makes me feel anxious and scared, especially whenever it has to do with climate. And so this one I felt really uncomfortable reading for those reasons, but also then the argument could be made, okay, so the book was written well, that it made you feel these things. Sure, I just didn't enjoy my experience reading it because I felt anxious. Nora Goes Off Script. It's a good one if you just want like a cheesy little romance that you know exactly what's gonna happen whenever you're reading it. So, I'm not gonna think about it really that often. So it goes in Who Read You. Taylor Jenkins Reid, Carrie Soto is back. It's gonna go in Living Rent Free. I really enjoyed it. I don't like it as much as I have some other Taylor Jenkins reads, and it didn't get me like emotionally involved in the same way that the top tier up there would be. And I don't feel passionate about any of the topics like tennis or anything, and so it's not going in. Could give a 40-minute presentation on, but good, solid book. Alice Feeney, Rock, Paper, Scissors, Loathe Entirely. This one, I'm gonna put it right next to Then She Was Gone. Oh, I'm gonna put it right next to Then She Was Gone because I feel like I didn't enjoy reading them for the same reasons. Just that it was so fast-paced and so twisty that I didn't feel convinced by any of the twists, and I've seen a lot of them coming, and I didn't really like any of the characters at all, which sometimes it can still be a fine read whenever you don't like any of the characters. And I think it was done purposefully not liking any of the characters. Like I think they were written that way, but it just doesn't make me enjoy it as much. I will say too that this year was very experimental for me with genres and different types of books and everything. And I really like a good thriller, but I've also learned that I really don't like a bad thriller. So I'll just keep, you know, in the upcoming year, I'll keep reading and figuring out what I do and don't like. Local Woman Missing. It's gonna go in Living Rent Free. I enjoyed it. It's very atmospheric, like very stormy and dark. I didn't see the end coming. Didn't feel quite convinced by the end. Like it wasn't a nice little bow that it tied it up into, but it still, I feel like, was an enjoyable experience. Ooh, A Thousand Splendid Suns is also going Living Rent Free. This was a reread for me. It's a tough book. Look up content warnings. It's a tough book, but it's a good book. It's the same author that wrote Kite Runner, if you know Kite Runner. And I feel like it's similar, but it's female protagonists instead. Whiteout is a book that was put together by 6 authors all together, and it takes place in Atlanta too, which I love. It's gonna go in Thanks for the Memories though. It was cute. I liked the side characters so much more than I liked the main characters. It is sort of a collection of short stories, but all of the short stories, it's like you focus in on a different character. So they're all tied together, but in each like character's chapter, it's like only them. So that was kind of unique too, and it was cute. Like I said, like it's young adult, but it is like they get snowed in and they're like working to get 2 of their friends back together. Pretty low stakes. All right, pulling up the rear here. Taylor Jenkins Reid, One True Loves. I'm gonna put it in Living Rent Free because it is something that I keep thinking about. Basically the synopsis is that, oh no, I can't even remember the main character's name. It's gonna go down, and I feel like it has to go down for that reason. Thanks for the Memories. Whoever the main character is. Emma, maybe? Her name might be Emma. Whoever she is, she married a man, and then that man is in a helicopter crash and is presumed dead, and it's like a year and a half, 2 years later, and she's engaged to another man. And you get this backstories on both of these guys. It feels very Jake versus Jesse. Her first husband is found. He is not dead. He comes back, and then she has to choose, do I go back to him because he's not dead anymore and we were married and had this great life, or do I pick this new man who I am currently in love with and engaged and was planning a life with him? Very Jake versus Jesse. One of their names is Jesse. I don't know who. One of their names is Jesse. It was all right. It definitely makes you think, like, what would I do in this situation? And it kind of pulls you along until the end to figure out who she's actually going to choose. So that's interesting too. These Silent Woods, the last book we're talking about today, which is good because for a first video, this is probably going to be like an hour long. Oops. Sorry, my bad. These Silent Woods by Kimmy Cunningham Grant. It was very different than I had thought it would be going into it. I thought it was going to be like thriller, we're snowed in the cabin in the woods and someone else is too, or you know, something like that. It's not. It's very emotional. Honestly, I can't even lie to you. This one's going to beware of the tear that may be shed, because page 253, I was on the verge of shedding a tear. It is a dad and his daughter who live in a cabin in the woods, very off-grid, no electricity. They don't go into town because there is a friend who's one of the only people who knows that they are there, who brings supplies every year. And it's just kind of navigating through, it's like a slow trickle of information as you find out how they ended up in this cabin, like why they're staying there, what the stakes are. I would say of the 3 that ended up in the Beware of the Tear That May Be Shed, this one is the lowest ranked out of those, but it was pulling something. There was an emotion that was starting to come as I was reading it. So those are all the books that I have read so far in this year, and a little bit about what I thought of each of them. Obviously, what I'm so excited for is like heading into this channel and heading into the new year is actually getting to experience books while making little bookish content. I'm very excited for that because there's several of these books I'm like, that would have made such a good reading vlog because they were either so good or so bad. I have quite a few videos planned like for this end of the year and heading into the new year, and I'm just very excited about them. I feel like this channel is kind of sparking a new enjoyment back into content creation for me because I get to talk about something that I really love in a space that is solely created for that thing, you know, little books, little stories. So obviously would love your support as we head forward. Hopefully videos just keep getting better and better because I am new at this part of it. But I hope you're having a great day, a wonderful day. I hope you choose to stick around to see what this channel becomes, the different videos that are coming out, and I will see you for the next one.